Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. All right, folks. So we have been dealing with the fact that Trump has gone into D.C. with his henchmen. We've been dealing with that for a few days now. And he did so, and I want you to understand this, he did so on a false premise. On this premise that black people commit all the crime, and crime is way up. You've heard some of his surrogates say that crime is worse in D.C. than it is in third world nations. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you that it's not black people committing the crime in D.C. It is the white supremacists. The white supremacists are the real criminals in this country and have been so for 400 years. But I want you to listen at how they talk about this issue, how they frame it, how they create a narrative that they want whites and even some blacks to buy into. And it was all articulated by one of Trump's most, quite honestly, effective communicators. This guy's all over college campuses. He's all in the Christian community with this narrative, with his narrative. And he has a huge following online, 5, 6, 7 million people, if not more. Hey, family, do you believe in the work we're doing? Does our content speak to you? Do you appreciate our in-depth legal analysis and political commentary from an African-American perspective? Do you believe it matters to our community? Then don't just watch from the sidelines. Please click that membership button and become a member of the 2% Club today. That's right, we need just 2% of our subscribers to become channel members. For just $4.99 a month, that's less than 20 cents a day, you'll help us keep creating powerful content that defends our democracy, demands justice, and develops a strong African-American community. But if you want more, at $9.99 a month, which is only 33 cents a day, you'll get access to exclusive members-only live streams, bonus content, and behind-the-scenes updates. And for just $14.99 a month, which is under 50 cents a day, our top-tier members get access to live Zone calls, strategy sessions, and a direct voice in shaping this movement. We're not just building a YouTube channel. Folks, we're building a movement based on righteousness and justice, just what our community needs in a time of disinformation and division. So if you believe in what we're doing, click the membership button and join now. Become a member of the 2% Club today. Let's build something powerful together. And a lot of African-American people don't really know Charlie Kirk. That's the guy I'm talking about. But I want you to listen and pay very close attention to how him and one of his guests frame this issue and justifies what they're doing. And then I'm going to, on the other side of this, show you why this is pure white supremacy gaslighting. All right, let's go over there and listen to Charlie Kirk and his guests.
President Donald Trump has announced that there's going to be a federal takeover of Washington, D.C. We have long said that crime is a choice, that rampant crime and the kind of degeneration of America's greatest cities.
Now, the first thing I want you to hear is he says crime is a choice. Now, what is wrong with that statement? Because I need you to think critically about this. What's wrong with that statement is it does not take into account the context, the root causes of crime. It lays crime on the backs of black people. And it does not at all bring into the story the folks who really created this country and caused this country to be a crime-ridden country. In fact, they built the country on crime. All right, so none of that's taken in consideration. Crime is a choice. All right, so I want you to think critically as you listen to this video.
Has been a conscious decision by our political leaders. Has there been a comparable example in history or even in modern Western times of a great power deciding to no longer be great? And your thoughts on the federalization of Washington, D.C. as President Donald Trump uses federal force to clean up our nation's capital?
I think it's a constant feature of declining societies, especially declining empires, that they lose the will to make the hard choices, that decisions become increasingly difficult because everyone wants to avoid accountability and responsibility. Laws get put into place just to protect the criminals because ultimately it's fear of the process that people worry about, not the fear of the actual crime. The people who are being victimized are put below the others. Their rights are less important than the rights of the criminal. I think that what we're seeing with Donald Trump right now is the willingness to say, no, law and order is what matters. The safety of the American people is what matters. And we're not going to let a bunch of soft on crime laws and everybody else who's trying to put all of these barriers between us and keeping the people safe. We're going to start ignoring those. We have the authority to do so. The Constitution grants Congress the ultimate legislative authority over Washington, D.C. It was never supposed to be its own city with its own political interests. And it certainly wasn't supposed to increase crime by putting these type of soft on crime policies in place. I think a lot of people have been waiting for moves like this from Donald Trump, and they're very encouraged to see him taking this kind of action.
Of course.
Now, before they go on, you heard him keep talking about soft on crime, right? Soft on crime. What is he getting at? He's getting at policies that have put in place to be not soft on crime, but fair, specifically to African-American people. Now, I know this because I am a practicing criminal defense civil rights attorney. I represent people who have been accused of crimes, and I represent people who have been abused by some person in law enforcement. So the laws that have been put in place based on the Bill of Rights, for example, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, those laws were put in place so that the government would not have all this power over individual people. And the government most often would violate the rights of African American people. And that's why various cases have been decided over the years to protect the vulnerable, to protect African American people. And they're blaming those laws for what they would say is the crime problem in America, like laws against torture, okay? Laws against beating black people up to get a confession, laws like that, laws where you got to appoint people an attorney if they can't afford one. They call those soft on crime laws that are at the root of the crime problem. They're wrong. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. But I want you to hear how they're framing this.
The press is up in arms over all of it. And it's not that crime is hard to stop. It's that it's mildly unpleasant to stop. And we have decided that if some groups will go to prison more often than others, then it's just not worth having real laws.
Some groups. Who is he talking about? He's talking about blacks. He is saying that America doesn't want to lock up a bunch of blacks because of the way it would look. Although black people need to be locked up because, in their minds at least, black folks are the criminals. We're the criminals, according to them. And we heard Trump say that. Trump said that in a black Detroit church and got a loud applause in a black Detroit church. So they blame us for the crime, but it's really the white supremacists. I'll show you that in just a moment. So listen to how they frame this.
Yeah, Charlie,
that's
we see this reflected.
Yeah, please, Aaron, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just that we see that reflected all over our society, that ultimately what people are worried about more is offense than actual safety. And so over and over again, we see people choosing not to offend certain groups, to placate certain politically correct theories about how society works, as opposed to look at how society is really working and taking action. And so a lot of people will notice, for instance, that certain groups, such as Black Americans, often commit higher crimes, but it is unfashionable.
Not true. But at least he goes on to say it. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. White people commit most of the crime in this country. White people commit most of the crime in this country, but they're blaming it on us. And they don't get to the root causes of the crime that we see in the African American community. And I tell you right now, the National Guard and 1,000 more police officers on each block won't change it, because the problems are much deeper than that. But let's listen.
To admit this, and noticing that more of these people would go to jail should people be actually arrested and the law enforced, means that we have to pull back on the actual crime enforcement. I believe you've talked to Steve Saylor about this kind of impact that we see over again.
And by the way, 1 out of every 3 Black men are already in prison, on parole, or probation now. That's a third. Let me say it again. Already, the country is targeting its law enforcement efforts on African Americans, although white commits most of the crimes. In that 1 out of 3, 1/3 of all Black men are in prison or jail, on parole, or probation. So they're saying more need to be locked up.
From kind of the perceptions our society has about how we should treat crime. And this is ultimately damaging people. So once again, like you said, we know how to solve this problem. It's not that crime is a mystery. We know what works, but we simply chose not to enforce it because ultimately crime is a policy choice. You can choose between actually enforcing the law and keeping people safe and having a free and equal society in which you understand that ultimately some groups who commit more crimes may end up in jail more often, or you can play, this game of obfuscating what's actually going on, being soft on these policies, ultimately hurting the very people who are contributing to society, just so you can please a bunch of people who ultimately probably aren't voting, aren't contributing, aren't being involved in the body politic anyway.
So there it is. He says they can't solve crime by being overly concerned about black people who don't vote, who don't contribute to society. This is pure white supremacy, what you're hearing right here. Pure white supremacy gaslighting that you hear from Charlie Kirk and this guy. And again, do not write Charlie Kirk off because he has the ear of Donald Trump. Charlie Kirk played a huge part in Trump winning this re-election, or rigging it, or whatever you want to call it. All right, he's all over college campuses having these conversations where he's pushing this white supremacy narrative. Now, so you heard that for yourself, and there's more to this, and I'm going to share more in another video. There's one really important part that I want you to hear, okay? Now, I want to use what you just heard to make 2 points, 2 primary points. One is white supremacists and white supremacy are the real criminals in this country. Now let that sink in. White supremacy and white supremacy, white supremacists are the real criminals in this country. Now, before you really can understand that, let me take you and show you what white supremacy is. All right? Here is a definition, my definition of white supremacy. White supremacy is a satanically backed global system of domination. Now, let me first underscore the fact that it's satanically backed. In a recent video that I did, I told you the issue with going after African-American men in this country. The root cause of that is the satanic forces behind a system of racism or systemic racism, which produces a subculture of poverty, of crime, and so on. Satanically inspired, backed, supported, created, that works through systemic racism, that produces a subculture of failure, basically. All right? Now, let's bring all that into my definition of white supremacy. White supremacy is a satanically backed global system of domination in which European nations and their descendants have long maintained control of power and wealth through interconnected institutions, systems, policies, strategies, and militarization designed to uphold a racial hierarchy that privileges whiteness and subjugates non-white continents, nations, and people groups, especially Africa and its diaspora. That is white supremacy. It's satanically backed, and it works through systemic racism. That's why I have in this definition. It controls power and wealth through interconnected institutions, systems, policies, strategies, and militarization. That's how they implement white supremacy. Now, let's read the second paragraph. Europeans and their descendants built white supremacy on the false belief that God created Europeans and their descendants superior and gave them the right to conquer and rule others. They used racist instruments such as the manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery, which they used to come over here and commit genocide against the natives here. So you want to talk about crime? There's crime right there. There are millions, tens of millions of Native Americans were murdered. So who are the real criminals? Who are the real criminals? America, you could say, is a great big crime scene. You could also say it is a continuous crime against marginalized people. And that continuous crime against marginalized people is what gives way, causes, and creates the environment for non-white marginalized people to create crime, to commit crime. But the root of it is a satanically backed, systemic racist system, the institutions and so forth that, again, creates this subculture that causes the crime. So when he said early on that crime is a choice, that's why I stopped there, because he has taken away all the crimes that white supremacists, white supremacy, white nationalists, white conservatives have committed in this country and around the world. You want to talk about criminals? Let's talk about the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of people robbed and brought over here and enslaved for 250 years. That is the greatest crime ever committed in America. Black men today who are out here in this subculture committing these crimes that they're using to spread white supremacy, more white supremacy, to justify white supremacy, pale in comparison to the crimes that white supremacists and white supremacy have committed on people of color, marginalized people. And like I said, the Native Americans, man, they practically wiped out those people and then built cities on top of the graves of those people, the natives. So you want to talk about criminals? Do you really, Charlie Kirk and the rest of you, want to have a conversation about who is really the criminals in America? Really? I am happy to have that conversation because it will expose the real culprit, the real criminals in this country. It will expose it every time. But see, few folks are talking about that because these folks are very good at controlling the narrative, just like you heard Charlie Kirk just do. And they're putting that out there. They're feeding and pumping that. And you know what the sad part is? A lot of people of color, including black folks, start buying into it, start repeating it. As they attack wokeness, as they attack critical race theory, as they're now attacking voting rights, civil rights, and everything else, a lot of blacks will come along and help spread that white supremacy. And you have a lot of these pro-black imposters, you've heard me say it so many times, who caused a lot of black people to help put Charlie Kirk, Trump, and the rest of these white supremacists in office in the first place. And now the pro-black imposters are trying to act outraged because of what Trump is doing in D.C. and will likely end up doing, or at least trying to do, in other cities. Because white supremacy can't work by itself. It needs people to cooperate with it. All right, it cannot work by itself. Let's just go back and read one thing here that I want you to see. The very last paragraph. One of white supremacy's most effective strategies is using non-white operatives. These individuals are recruited, conditioned, deployed, and rewarded for betraying their own people while advancing the goals of white supremacy. Without them, white supremacy would struggle to operate as effectively as it does against others, especially Africa and the African diaspora. So yes, when you talk about the criminals in the community, it's really the white supremacists, but they do have their black supporters. So if we really are serious, Trump and Charlie Kirk and the rest of you, about reducing crime in inner city neighborhoods, then address white supremacy. Address all the white supremacy policies that you use to maintain white dominance over power and the wealth of this nation. Address those policies. And I would say, for example, the big ugly bill, they call it the big beautiful bill, does the very opposite of that. That's what I'm talking about. Just ride through a predominantly black community in your city and look at all the poverty. That's by design. That is by design. That is not because black people won't work or black people are unintelligent or black people have a propensity to commit crime. That's bull. That is by design. That is white supremacy. That is the result of the institutions, the systems, and all that is used, again, to dominate and control white power and white wealth. So let's really get to the bottom. I think Trump started out in the right place, D.C. I think that's the place to be. It's just that he needs to go to the White House. He needs to go to the Congress. He needs to go to the Supreme Court. He needs to go to some of those federal agencies that push white supremacy and cause the rest of the country, especially black people, to have to scrounge around and fight for crumbs on the table or that have fallen to the floor. And yeah, you control the resources in any community and you keep those resources scarce, there's going to be crime. There's going to be fighting. There's going to be poverty that breeds all of that. A good place to look is go to any Native American reservation and see what you see. You see many of the same issues. or go over to Gaza and see how the way Israel controls the food and the resources going into Gaza, look at how the people act to get their hands on food and resources. It is the power structure, the white supremacy power structure that is really at fault here, not black victims of those institutions and systems. So remember that, folks. Don't let these people gaslight you. All right? So I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for watching this video. Stay woke.